The publishing industry has a new popular theme: books related to the threat to American democracy. Turns out that according to books like The False White Gospel, Confronting Christofascism, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy, and American Idolatry, turns out in these books that have been published recently, the common theme is there is a danger to the destruction of American democracy, and it is, horror of horrors, American conservative Christians, evangelicals. We are the extremists that the world needs to be warned about. Well, American democracy is in fact in danger. But let's talk about where the real problems are. In an attempt to create what President Biden calls guardrails of democracy, he has proposed that in the last few months of his administration, he wants to revolutionize, he wants to overhaul the Supreme Court. He's made 3 proposals. He suggests that there needs to be a constitutional amendment addressing presidential immunity. He wants to revoke the constitutional lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, and he wants to impose a new code of conduct. In other words, he wants to restructure the system so that the Supreme Court will function as a branch of the executive government. It's interesting, these so-called guardrails of democracy are really unnecessary because constitutionally, federal judges enjoy lifetime appointments precisely because of the temptations for politicians to pressure them to make decisions that are aligned with narrow political party values and agendas. The standards of justice are to be unmarred by political considerations. Lifetime appointments are one of the ways that the Founding Fathers asserted the positive benefit of judicial independence, and they wanted to protect that by making judges immune from the political pressure to be appointed or elected. The justices should also, frankly, be protected in their persons and their property from protesters and people who would do them harm, which is something that the current administration has often failed to do. Courts are not put in place to make popular or majoritarian decisions. They are rather entrusted to preserve the rights of the few, and sometimes even the rights of the one, against the tyrannical demands of the many and the powerful. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15, God instructs Israel in their judicial system. He says, "You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor." As far as putting in special rules to punish bad behavior by Supreme Court justices, actually, if the president would read the Constitution that he's sworn to defend, Article 3 of the Constitution already provides a process for setting aside or taking a Supreme Court judge out of his position in the case of bad action. What the president doesn't do is admit that the judiciary is still the most trusted branch of government, that the Congress and the executive branches are at historically dismal approval ratings. The Supreme Court is not a lot higher, but it is the highest of the 3 branches right now. The president seems to be confused in his thinking, which is not a surprise in itself, but he thinks that the Supreme Court's health and integrity is just a matter of popular approval. In other words, we need people on the bench that his people can like. Frankly, I'm not comforted when he talks about restructuring the system so that he can pack the Supreme Court with people that his people like, because they've already announced that people like me are the problem. And changing the rules of the Supreme Court would be just another way to weaponize government against its own citizens. Well, he's not running for president again. He's leaving office. So why are we talking about this? Well, it's because alongside these proposed Supreme Court alterations, we have a candidate, at least on the Democratic side, who has proposed significant changes to the way we structure our government in order to accomplish a particularly narrow partisan agenda and platform. In answering a question on Wisconsin Public Radio, Kamala Harris said, I think it's been very clear we should eliminate the filibuster in order to re-implement Roe. That is the legality of abortion at a federal level. Now, the reason this is a big deal, you may think the word filibuster is kind of an obscure term related to the intricacies, the in and outs of the way politics works. But essentially, like the rules that our founding fathers put in place for the Supreme Court, the filibuster is designed to provide protection from a kind of tyranny that comes when you have a 51-49 majority and the ability to ram through legislation that is not in the best interest of the 49%. You see, in the Senate, the filibuster requires that 60% or 60 out of 100 senators are required to vote in order to end debate, to bring an issue to the floor for a straight-up vote. Now, to set aside the filibuster has happened a couple of times in recent years. It's often been called the nuclear option. It's been used 2 times in particular, one on each side of the aisle. The Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, a few years ago when he was Majority Leader, he set aside the filibuster rule in order to confirm a series of presidential cabinet nominees made by President Barack Obama. In other words, because of the opposition, he wasn't able to assemble a cabinet because they couldn't receive Senate approval. By the same token, Mitch McConnell, when he was Senate Majority Leader under the Republican administration of Donald Trump, he set aside the filibuster for a time in order to secure Supreme Court nominations that had been locked up in the process. Now, what's interesting here is that while each side has invoked this so-called nuclear option one time each in recent years, both instances were about the confirmation of the appointment of people, cabinet members or Supreme Court justices. What Vice President Harris is proposing is to eliminate the filibuster altogether so that she can push through legislation. To set aside the filibuster has happened in confirmation battles, but it has never been typically used to pass legislation. The reason that she wants to do this, to eliminate the filibuster altogether, is because she has positions, particularly related to abortion, that are so radical that she can't get a 60% majority in the Senate to sign off on her legislation. She can only push through this radical agenda if she rigs the game so that a 51-49 majority can impose its will on the rest of the body. Now, I heard the vice presidential debate recently, and Tim Walz, who is Kamala Harris's running mate, made the statement that they've been falsely accused for holding to a position of abortion for the full 9 months for any reason. He said that's not the case. That's propaganda. That's blah, blah, blah. Fact of the matter is that's a lie. Because Kamala Harris supports what's called the Women's Health Protection Act. This act has already been supported by 46 Democrats and 3 independents. If she eliminates the filibuster, and if the Democrats take the Senate in the next election, this Women's Health Protection Act, she has already said this will be a keynote, a cornerstone of her legislative priority. let me tell you about the Women's Health Protection Act. It would reestablish the legal framework of both Roe and Casey previous abortion decisions, only it would expand access far beyond anything we've ever seen before. It would, this is a quote, it would prohibit any government anywhere from doing anything that could even potentially reduce the number of abortions from actually taking place. Not only that, it would require every government everywhere to repeal every statute, regulation, or anything else that may already be on the books that could potentially have that effect. In other words, it will set aside every abortion law in every state in the union, taking the control out of the hands of the people state by state to make the decision, and it will implement an abortion law that will make taxpayer-funded abortions available all the way up to 9 months, the full term of the pregnancy, for any elective reason whatsoever. It is an extraordinary position, not shared by the American people in general, but not even shared by those people who claim to be pro-choice. Polls show that even pro-choice Americans favor restrictions on late-term abortions. They support parental consent requirements for abortions made available to minors, and they're in favor of other health and safety regulations to be built into the process. This bill doesn't allow for any of that. Democrats seek to change the rules so that they can thrust their unpopular, unwanted agenda on the public through sheer force of will. She is underlining the fact that she's willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that death in the womb remains the highest priority of today's Democratic Party. When you talk about changing the rules so that you can impose unpopular legislation, I have to ask the question, now who's the threat to democracy? Kelly Robinson, who's the president of the Human Rights Campaign, another pro-abortion organization, she said this: Harris's election would potentially be the time not merely to secure democracy, but to reimagine it with people who look and love like us. Those are code words, by the way. Robinson wanted to think of freedom in a more revolutionary way than the founders ever proposed, and she suggests that in order to have a new kind of America, we have to go beyond what the founders put down on that little piece of paper. That's her quote. That little piece of paper is the Constitution of the United States. Democrats are serious about reimagining what democracy looks like. They want to get rid of the Senate filibuster. They want to change the rules for the Supreme Court. They want to have a 51% rule that they can use in near despotic fashion over the other 49%. They tell us that they want to do this in the name of democracy, that they're protecting America from crazy extremists like those pesky conservative Christians. All I know is, throughout history, the most radical revolutionaries have talked in the same kind of language that Kamala Harris uses. Revolutionaries have always claimed that they were protecting democracy when they have instituted the worst kind of tyranny. During the French Revolution, the Jacobins, in the name of democracy and progress, created an unhinged and unstable regime that ended up murdering thousands of French citizens. We're told all the time both parties are bad. The fact of the matter is that Trump and Harris are nowhere near each other in this issue. Democrats have gone further than anybody ever before them by proposing a political ideology that moves Americans past their settled constitutional state and into a regime devoted to cultural, political, and social revolution. Have you ever noticed this bumper sticker that she uses in all of her speeches? She looks thoughtful and says, She says, we can be what we can be, unburdened by what has been. Now, beside the fact that that just sounds silly, let me tell you what she means. She means that it is possible for humans to somehow escape our past and start a brand new day with a fresh beginning, unburdened by what has been. We can be anything we want to be. Only if you're a student of history, you understand that every totalitarian state in modern times has used the same kind of language. The French Revolution started fresh with a new calendar. They called it Year One. The Soviet Union listed Red October as the beginning of a new order in the earth. In China, the Cultural Revolution was said to start all over again with a fresh beginning, putting behind the long history of Chinese culture. Pol Pot had his revolution tied to what he called Year Zero. All of these dictators, tyrants, had an ideology predicated on the belief that humanity can start new. We can be cleansed of all the imperfections of what has been before. The problem is, when we forget what has gone before, we create inevitably a horror of what is to come. The Bible has some things to say about remembering. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, Israel is instructed this way. Verse 7, it says, "Remember the days of old. Consider the years of all generations. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you." In Psalm 143, verse 5, the psalmist says, "I remember the days of old. I meditate on all your accomplishments, Lord. I reflect on the work of your hands." You see, memory is a Christian, a biblical virtue. We remember the things that we did wrong, and we learn from those things. And we remember the things that have been done right, and we build on those things. There is nothing scarier that I have heard from this Democratic candidate than the idea that unburdened by everything that has gone before us, we can become anything we want to be. That is not only empty propaganda, it's a very dangerous thought. Be godly. Be wise. Seek the Lord and stand on the truth of His Word in making this decision. This is Truth Currents.